Today we're going to start section 10b. So last section we talked about the importance of what a plant is. We talked about the organs of a plant, like the leaves, the root, the stems. We talked about different structures of leaves. So in this one, we're going to talk about what does a plant do? What are the functions that occur inside of the plant? So before we study what the function of the plant is, we should know an important term. This will come up a lot in other sciences, and you might have heard it in your daily lives. It's called physiology. If you've ever heard of anatomy and physiology, which I also teach, by the way, you will know that anatomy is what we learned in the last section about plants. We learned about the structure of the plant, the leaf, the roots, the stem, the veins. Those are all anatomy. Those are things that make up the plant. But when we talk about physiology, we're talking about the function of the plant. So we're learning about what does a plant actually do. When we talk about physiology regarding humans, we're talking about what does a human body do? What does our skeletal system do? What does our muscular system do? So what are some functions of the plant? One of the functions of the plant is right here. It absorbs and transfers water and air. We know that one of the main things a plant uses for life is water. And one of the main jobs a plant has is to take in the carbon dioxide that we, as well as animals, breathe out, convert it to oxygen, and release it into the air so that we can breathe that in. They also are able to make sugar through the process of photosynthesis. We talked about this in the last chapter. Remember when we talked about cellular respiration, a plant is able to take energy from the light, the sun, and convert it to chemical energy, which is the sugar. Plants are also have the ability to grow, and then they also respond to the environment that they're in, especially the environment that God created them to be in. So we'll learn about, different characteristics of plants and how they can actually move. You may not know that plants move, but they do. And how do they produce a fruit, and how do they produce flowers and things like that? So one of the main things that we said that plants are involved in is water movement. So most plants will get the water that they need through roots. That's why the root system is very important. Roots are in the dirt and in the soil. And so through these roots, they're able to take in minerals that are important, nutrients that are important, and also water. So there are 3 steps that are important in transporting water in a plant. So the first thing that happens is water enters through the root, right? So if you have a plant in some soil, or even if you have some flowers in your house, you put them in water. Otherwise, they are not going to last. And so what happens is the roots will take in the water that is in the soil, and then they have a specific system that the water is going to move through. And we'll talk about that as we get further in this chapter. The system, just as a kind of foreshadowing, is called the xylem. And then once the water goes through the plant, they will actually exit from the leaves, okay? So a lot of times in the morning, if you've noticed like dew on plants, if you've noticed, which can occur, through sunlight, through just the moisture in the air. But a lot of times you might, go for a walk and notice, why is this leaf wet? It didn't rain. And it's a lot of the times, it's because of the water that exits through the leaves through what we'll call as transpiration. And that we'll also learn about transpiration in the next couple of slides. But this is just a kind of a method that plants use, from taking in water from the soil through the plant to nourish the plant, and then it will actually eventually leave the leaves. A lot of times this happens so subtly that we will not notice water actually being removed from the leaves through evaporation, but it is something that is constantly happening. So what happens with the root? So there's something important that the roots have that you may not notice because they're super duper tiny, and those are our root hairs. So the roots of the plants have these tiny hairs. We learned in the last chapter that some roots have lateral roots, especially tap roots. But most roots actually do have these really small hairs that, one, increase the surface area of the root so that they can take in more minerals and more water that is in the soil. And these root hairs are extensions of the epidermis. And what happens is the epidermis is this really thin covering on roots, on leaves, on stems that we'll learn about. And they help to take in material as well as provide a protective layer for the actual root. So, like I said, what is the epidermis, right? So the epidermis is a 1 cell layer thick. That is pretty thin, actually. If you look at our body and you look down at your skin, so everyone look down at your skin for a second, look at your hand. What you see on your hand right now and all over your body is actually your epidermis. Our epidermis kind of plays a similar role of the ones that are in plants, though they don't look the same and are not made up of the same material. But our epidermis is also made up of cells, but different types of cells. And our epidermis is actually 5 layers thick. And that's just 1 layer of the skin. We have like 3 layers of skin, and each layer has multiple layers within it. But just like our epidermis protects our skin from bacteria, from keeping moisture in, the epidermis on plants also do the same. So the epidermis on the roots, like I said, is 1 cell layer thick. They help to protect the roots. They help to absorb water and minerals that are in the soil. And they have tiny extensions, like we said, that are called the root hairs. So the epidermis itself is what is making up these root hairs. So they're not like the hair that's on your head. They are different. And they also increase the surface, increase the surface area of the root. And then this helps a root to kind of have little projections that can go into the soil further and to take in water and other particles, like sometimes you put plant food, if you've heard of that, like Miracle-Gro, and that helps to be absorbed through these root hairs as well. So if you look at this kind of close up of a root, you can see tiny cells that are making up these different layers. We're going to talk about what the xylem is. We're going to talk about what the phloem is. Xylem, just as a heads up, helps to move water from the root to the stem and to the leaves of the plant. And the phloem actually helps to transport sugar from the leaves down to the stem and to the roots, because remember, sugar is made in the leaves because leaves are where photosynthesis occurs. Then we talked about epidermis, which is like the yellow outlining you can see all around the root itself, which also makes up the root hairs, which are tiny projections that help to absorb more water and minerals. And then the root cap is actually the area where you have growth happening on the root. So how does this happen? So water is going to move through the cells, like the epidermis, in the root until it reaches something called vascular tissue inside of the root. The vascular tissue is usually made up of different cells that can help transport material. So water enters specifically through something called the xylem, and it enters through the process of osmosis. Make sure you know this. Okay, so make sure you have this underlined or highlighted, that water enters through the xylem, which remember I said are cells that help to transport water specifically, and this happens through osmosis. And the xylem, which is actually super narrow and kind of like looks like a straw, they are the ones that are going to help transport water. So the xylem will kind of look like this, and as they mature, they will connect from end to end, and they will take in water, and the water will move up through the xylem to wherever it needs to go. So it kind of plays the similar role of what a straw would do when you were drinking some kind of liquid. Okay, transpiration pulls water up the plant. So there is something called transpiration, which I kind of mentioned earlier, which is the process of water going from the roots to the leaves. So like I said, epidermis not only covers, just like in our body, the epidermis doesn't just cover our hands or our legs. Our epidermis on our body covers every part of our body, right? Pretty much. So the same thing with the leaves. The leaves also have a layer of epidermis because this helps them to not lose water all the time. They need to make sure that there is some kind of boundary and some kind of prevention method that prevents, water loss all the time. And so one of the ways they do this is on the leaves, they have these openings, very tiny opening called the stomata. And the stomata is specifically found on the bottom of the leaves, the underside of the leaves. So what the stomata does is it has these special cells called the guard cells that surround the stomata on either side. So there's 2 guard cells per stomata. Okay, that's why it says it's arranged in pairs. So there's, I'm going to just write this on the side, 2 guard cells per stomata. Okay, so this is super important. And I'm going to show you a diagram of it too. And what they do is the guard cells will actually open and close the stomata, which is a small opening on the underside of the leaves. And this will help to regulate when water can leave and when gases can leave, or when gases can come in order to control the life and livelihood of the plant. And so the stomata are the main openings that you can have on the leaves that help with gas exchange and water exchange. So the stomata is very, very important. So what does the stomata look like? So this is what a stomata looks like. So you have the stomata, which is this right here. This is the tiny opening on the bottom of the leaves. And then around the stomata, you have 2 guard cells. So you have 1 guard cell over here, and you have another guard cell over here. All right. Sometimes the guard cells can have vacuoles, which we talked about can hold, it's like a place for storage, whether it's water or nutrients. And they can also have, chloroplasts. Chloroplasts help with, what do they help with? They help with photosynthesis, right? So when you have 1 stomata, you have 2 guard cells, 1 on either side. So you have 1 over here, and then you have that points right here, and then you have another guard cell right here. And then these guard cells are what are actually going to open and close the stomata. So for example, if you have a plant in a very dry environment, that means the sun is probably scorching hot. That means the plant is more viable to wither away because the sun is going to beat down on the plant, and evaporation can cause the plant to, be drained of its water. So what the guard cells do is when they sense the temperature is getting really hot, they will they will kind of tighten up, and they will close the stomata, which is the opening, okay? They will close, I'm just gonna write that this is the opening. The guard cells will close the stomata and prevent any water from leaving. Now, this also means there's no gas exchange happening and there's no water exchange happening either. But then say it comes to nighttime and, you have a little bit of precipitation occurring. The guard cells will open up at the nighttime, let water leave or take in water, allow gas exchange to happen. And that way, they are conserving water during the day and then able to do whatever they need to do during the nighttime. So what is transpiration exactly? Transpiration is when you have water being taken up from the roots and exits out from the leaves, okay? So that is the main definition of transpiration. Exiting of water through the stomata of plants. And then the process that we talked about is that it comes from the roots. It goes through the xylem. Remember, the xylem is specifically those straw-like structures that transport only water. And then they will take that water from the roots all the way to the leaves. And then the leaves, you will have those stomatas, which are on the bottom side of the leaves, that have guard cells that attach to them that allow opening and closing so that they can exchange gases and water with the environment. When we do lose these water molecules through transpiration, the plant will also, not us, but when plants lose water through transpiration, water is going to be constantly replaced by, water that is in the roots. So what will happen is if I have my xylem right here and water is coming in from the soil and it's going to the leaves. What will happen is if the water goes to the leaves and then eventually leaves out, the water that is down here will continue to move up, okay? So water will come in through the roots. So say the roots are down here. They'll come in through the roots, up out of the leaves and into the surrounding. And then the water that is at the bottom is going to continuously keep moving up as more water leaves. And that is why it's really important to make sure our soil of a plant is nice and moist. So as water is being released through the leaves, through transpiration, it has enough moisture in the soil to keep taking in water so that the plant does not wither. So this is kind of a look on what it looks like for transpiration. So water right here, it says that water and dissolved minerals enter roots through the epidermis and pass through the xylem, okay? So you can see that the soil is here, water is entering into past the epidermis. This is the epidermis. They enter the xylem, which is right here. Once they enter the xylem, water and dissolved minerals travel up the xylem vessels. So water comes in from the soil, goes up through the stem, through the xylem, and then they reach the leaves. Water and dissolved minerals travel through the veins in the leaves, and then they will escape through the stomata, which are the tiny openings that we see here, and then they will be released through the environment. Okay, if too much water is lost from the cells, the leaf can actually wilt, it can actually die, and because you're losing turgor pressure. And that's why whenever I say, a plant looks wilted, it's because there's not enough turgor pressure, because there's not enough water, and that's not a good thing for plants. So the guard cells really have to be on guard, when they are controlling the opening and closing of the stomata, because they need to make sure that they are preserving the water that the plant has if, there are days that are drier than other days, or, if the temperature is off, and so on and so forth. So they have a very important role to really preserve the plant and to make sure that the plant is well alive. The next part we're going to talk about is gas exchange. So we said that the stomata is involved in, water coming out of the plant, but there's also important, function that's happening, which is gas exchange. We said that, we as humans and animals, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and plants are the ones that take in carbon dioxide and convert it to oxygen, so that we can breathe that in, because that's what we need for our bodies. So all plants pretty much go through aerobic cellular respiration. Remember, aerobic means that we need oxygen, which is O2. And this allows them to, this is a process of cellular respiration where you use oxygen to convert sugar to a usable energy, and this usable energy is ATP. So when we use oxygen, we are actually producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And this byproduct is what allows us to, this is what comes out as a waste product or a byproduct, and that's what we breathe out. And this is what plants take in. So whenever you see a plant, usually in the green parts of plants, not like the woody regions of like a tree trunk, or sometimes the stems are super dark because they don't really exhibit this, but in the green parts of plants you have the stomata also participating in exchange of gases. So this is when the CO2 will come into the plant. So say there's like a leaf, it's a really bad looking leaf, but if you have the leaf here, the CO2 will come into the plant, and then you have oxygen that will come out of the plant. So this is kind of a super close look at a leaf. You can see that, you have the guard cells that are around the hole, which is the stomata. Sometimes it can be called stoma as well. And then you can see that there's water coming from the xylem, which is what is transporting water. So the water will come out of the xylem and then it will go through the xylem layer, or the layer that is making up the tissues of the leaf, and then it will exit out of the leaf itself. And then this is also how you have gas exchange happening as well. Not through the xylem, but in a different form, but still using the stomata as well. In the woody parts of plants, we have another term called the lenticels. This is where you have oxygen going through the tiny openings on plants such as trees that have bark. So the lenticels on a stem, they are the ones that allow gas exchange to happen. So the stomata is located on the green part of plants, and the lenticels are located on the harder bark, woody parts of plants. There are tiny coverings in the roots of plants that are in the soil that allow gas exchange as well. And so roots can play a role in gas exchange with the air that is trapped in the soil. So yes, there is actually air that is located in the soil, and the roots will actually have these tiny pores or tiny, cover. It's a very thin covering, like the epidermis we said is only 1 cell thick. It's very, very thin compared to our skin. Our epidermis actually has 5 layers. But, on plants, the roots have really thin epidermis layer. Therefore, it's easy to exchange gases that are trapped in the soil. Another thing about gas exchange is that worms and insects that actually live in the soil, they can actually help bring air to the plant roots to help a gas exchange occur. What they do is whenever you see a worm or some kind of bug that lives in the ground, they make tunnels underground. And, when you build these tunnels, you're actually providing a pathway for air to come into the soil and to the roots. And so sometimes this can be a good thing, sometimes it can be a bad thing. Because one, it can be a good thing because one, you're allowing air to come through, you're allowing water to come through because the tunnels allow a passageway for water to get to the plant, during raining season or just a regular rain. But if there are too many tunnels or too much rain, that can actually, be too much for the roots to handle, and therefore they can kind of drown the roots, therefore drown the plant, and the plant will actually die, or it can be very sick. Some plants are built to survive in water, like you've seen seaweed and things like that. And they are able to, have a different format of how they can kind of withstand that. But a lot of plants can't, be, drowned in water because they're not used to that. Okay, so we did talk about photosynthesis in the last chapter, which we said, happens in plants. They use... It's a part of cellular respiration, how you make energy from the process of taking light energy from the sun and converting it to chemical energy, which you make sugar out with. So we said that the main parts of the plant that are involved in this is the chloroplasts, which are located, which have chlorophyll located inside of them. So the chloroplasts have chlorophyll, which is a green pigment. So the chlorophyll is a green pigment that's located inside of chloroplasts. And this is where you have photosynthesis occurring, okay? And the main organ that is involved in photosynthesis is the leaves of plants, because those are the ones that are really exposed to sunlight, and so they are really able to capture light energy from the leaves and then convert it to chemical energy. This is a cutout of a plant leaf that you can see. We're going to talk about the different layers, but you can kind of see the little chloroplasts that are involved in making up the leaves. You can see the cuticle that, is an outside covering of the leaf that secretes that, it's a waxy substance on the outside of the leaf. You can see the epidermal layer. You can see the veins that are made up of the xylem and the phloem. So you can see the guard cells that make up the stomata, and then you can see the actual opening. So there's a lot that goes into just a small part of a leaf. Okay, so in a leaf, when you're looking at the leaf, under the epidermal layer, you have these cells that are packed pretty close to each other, and they're pretty tall, so they kind of look like super long. And these are cells that make up the palisade layer. So I'm going to go back for a second. Oops. So this is the layer I'm talking about. So you can see these cells that are kind of long, right? So these long cells that are tightly packed together, they make up the palisade or palisade layer, okay? Oops, let me go back for a second. Okay. So the palisade layer, they contain a lot of chloroplasts. And, you know, the chloroplasts actually are moving through the cytoplasm that are that are inside these cells that make up the palisade layer. And they kind of move in a circular path. So if this is my cell in the palisade layer, so you have a bunch of cells, and then you have these tiny chloroplasts that are the green. They're actually going to move in a circular motion. So they're going to move in a circle. And that's going to be, you know, in the cytoplasm of the cell. So they're kind of floating in there and moving around. And they're going to move around something specific. They're going to be moving around the central vacuole. And so this way, all of the chloroplasts, if this is the top of the leaf up here, all of the chloroplasts will eventually have a moment to be at the top of the leaf where you are getting the most amount of sunlight. And so they're all able to capture light energy through the chlorophyll that's located inside of the chloroplast, and therefore they're able to process photosynthesis. So I'm going to say that again. You have the palisade layer, which is what I kind of drew here, that is made up of these circular long cells. Inside those cells, you have chloroplasts that are moving in a circle around a central vacuole. So just imagine this white being the central vacuole. Okay, so those chloroplasts are moving around the central vacuole, and these chloroplasts, because they move in a circle, they're all going to have a chance to reach the top of the leaf where you have the most amount of sunlight. Okay, you have the most amount of sunlight coming in, and therefore they're able to capture the energy from the sunlight to make sugar, or to allow photosynthesis to actually occur. There's another layer, though, that is underneath the palisade layer, and that's called the spongy layer. And they have a lot of air spaces between them. So they're not as tight as a palisade layer. They have a lot of, open spaces between them. And they also have chloroplasts. Now, they have fewer chloroplasts than this palisade layer. So if I ask you, which layer, palisade or spongy, has the most amount of chloroplasts, you should be able to tell me the palisade layer. And so the reason why we don't have as many chloroplasts in the spongy layer is because the spongy layer is beneath, is usually on the underside of the leaf. The underside of the leaf does not get a ton of sunlight. Therefore, the amount of photosynthesis that occurs is very minimal. Therefore, you don't need a lot of chloroplasts, because the main job of chloroplasts is photosynthesis. So if you ever look at a leaf on a tree, you can actually notice that the top part of the leaf is going to be a lot more darker green, because there's more chloroplast, therefore more chlorophyll, which is a green pigment, and the bottom of the leaf is actually going to be a lot lighter green, because there's not as many chloroplasts, therefore not as many chlorophyll, which gives it the green pigment. Now, why are there air spaces? That's okay. It's actually a really good thing, because when you have water coming from the roots and they're moving through the xylem, they will actually carry water to those spaces that you have between the cells. And then you also have carbon dioxide that's being moved throughout the plant, and it's going to go reach the stomata, and it's going to reach the spaces that you have and exchange the carbon dioxide for oxygen, so that it can release that oxygen back into the atmosphere. So there are a lot of, a couple spaces that you have in leaves that are beneficial, because they allow other parts of the plant to release certain substances, whether it's water, whether it's gas, and that allows them to have an exchange with the surrounding and with the environment that is beneficial for the plant and also beneficial for us because we need oxygen. So now that we talked about those terms, let's kind of look at this diagram again. So we have the palisade layer, which I said has these long cells that make them up, and they are very tight with each other. And they make up the top part of the leaf. So this is where you have the sun. And so this is the top part of the leaf, and then this is the bottom part of the leaf. All right, so the palisade layer has a bunch of these long cells, each with chloroplasts located. Okay, so these are your chloroplasts. Remember, they're moving in a circular motion, so they all get a chance to reach the top of the leaf, therefore grab some light energy to make sugar and do photosynthesis. The spongy layer, on the other hand, this is a lot of more open spaces. So you can kind of see how the cells are more spread out. They have some chloroplasts, not a lot, but they face the bottom of the leaf. And these air spaces are good because you have, veins that are coming in with xylem and phloem, carrying sugar and water, that allows for movement of nutrients. And you also have spaces that allow for the stomata and the guard cells to be active so that you can have gas exchange as well occurring. So one of the main products of photosynthesis is sugar and oxygen, both of which are super crucial to humans and animals. Sugar gives, humans and animals energy. It's a source of fuel. And then oxygen, obviously, we need to breathe. So sugar is actually, made from photosynthesis, like we said. And we said that the process is that it takes energy from the sunlight and then it's able to convert it to whatever amount of glucose or sugar that we need. And so sometimes what happens is the cells that do photosynthesis, if you remember, what are they? Say it right now. They are the chloroplast and the chlorophyll. Remember, chlorophyll is the green pigment that is inside of chloroplast that actually captures the light energy and then produces it into sugar. So this is plants are able to make their own energy and own supply of energy through the process of photosynthesis to make sugar. And then the sugar, when it's made in the leaves, which is where most of photosynthesis occurs, and that is where you have a lot of chlorophyll and chloroplast happening, what will happen is, how does it get to the rest of the plant? It gets to the rest of the plant because of the phloem. So the phloem is the main transport system that the plant has that carries the sugar made in the leaves to the rest of the plant, whether it's the flowers or whether it's the stem or the roots. And so that is an important thing that we need to know. So remember, xylem transports water and phloem transports sugar. So the overall importance of plants is, one, to make energy. If they can't make their own energy, because remember, plants are producers, right? So that's an important term to also know. Plants are producers. That means they make their own food. So they have to make their own food through capturing light energy. And sometimes, because of the amount of chloroplast that you can have on one single leaf is a ton. And so they are constantly making sugar. And so sometimes they don't use that sugar right away, and they have to have a form of, how can we store this excess sugar so that we can tap into it later when we're running out? And one of the ways they store it is through starch. So starch is an example of just a bunch of sugar molecules that are stored together. And then sometimes they get converted to lipids, which are fats, and oils that they can also be stored in as well. So these are the two things that sugar can be converted to. So sugar can be converted to either starch or lipids. Another important thing we talked about that plants do as they're part of their physiology is growth. So plants are always growing, whether they're growing a new leaf, they're growing in height or thickness, or all of them. This is constantly happening. And the main areas where they are going to grow is this, oops, that is a bad line, tips of stems, the tips of roots, and then also they have growth occurring between the xylem and the phloem. And we kind of saw this when we talked about the bark of a tree. So the area of growth is called the vascular cambium, okay? This is the area that's located between the xylem and the phloem. So if you remember when we talked about the bark, we also talked about the cambium. And that was also an area where mitosis was happening so that we could have new cork cells grow and then be pushed out. So the same thing with this vascular cambium. This is located, like I said, between the xylem and the phloem, and it's producing new xylem and phloem for the plant. Okay, so this is when you have new cells that are constantly being made so that you can have the plant actually showing growth. And that it can be a visible growth with enough time that passes, even though you may not notice it all of a sudden. But please make sure that you understand this vocab word, vascular cambium, and that it relates to xylem and phloem, and that's where the growth is occurring. There's also something called the cork cambium, which produces new cork cells. So if you think about it, cork cambium kind of tells you what new cells are being made, which is the cork cells, new cork cells. And then if we go back to the previous slide, when we talked about the vascular cambium, you can think about vascular tissue or vascular bundle. Remember when we said that the vascular bundle is when you have xylem and phloem, okay? And so when you have vascular cambium, this is related to the growth and new production of the plant's xylem and phloem. So when we get to the cork cambium, you can think of the production of new cork cells. And this is important because this helps to protect the actual plant, and this makes the outside part of the plant's stem. Now, in order for growth to happen, you need a couple things. Example, you need water and you need sugar. So where is the water coming from? The water is coming from the roots of the plant. Remember, it travels from the roots to the stem to the leaves through the xylem. And then sugar is being made through the process of photosynthesis in the leaves, and it's transported by the phloem. So sugar is transported by the phloem from the leaves all the way down to the rest of the plant, and then the water is transported by the xylem from the roots to the rest of the plant. There are other things that enhance and provide growth for the plant, such as the environment. So if they're in a good environment, they are able to flourish better than if they are in a worse one. Some plants, grow well in moist environments versus dry, or vice versa. And then there's also plant hormones that help to help the plant grow. And sometimes, if you've ever heard of Plant Food or Miracle-Gro, they have added plant hormones to the plant. People who package plants or fruits or vegetables and send them around the world from one location to another also can add plant hormones to certain things to help plants last longer. So, like I said, the environment, such as the type of soil, is it moist, is it too dry, is it too wet, or the amount of sunlight a plant gets, those are all things that can affect the growth of a plant and are tied to the plant's environment. So they can either help the plant grow or they may not help the plant grow. So the definition for plant hormone, so a hormone is right here, the chemical substance made by plants that affect how the plant tissues grow. Okay, so plants do actually make hormones. Some of them are man-made and they can be used for the plants as well, but the plant itself can make hormones to help the plant divide, to make the plant grow thicker or taller, It can also help the plant to stop growing. And plant hormones can also determine what the function of the plant is going to be. So what is it producing, like fruits or vegetables, flowers, so on and so forth. And what usually happens is a plant hormone has a specific area where it gets made in the plant, and then it will be transferred to other areas of the plant that may need to grow or may need, to be repaired or may need to stop growing. In the 1920s, there is a specific hormone that was discovered, and that was called auxin. And it's specifically known as a growth hormone. And it's specifically seen in the tips of the plants. So the tips of the plant is where the growth hormone actually occurs. And then depending on the growth hormone, it can affect different types of plants in different ways. So one growth hormone may impact one plant more than another one, and it really depends on the type of plant that you are dealing with. But make sure you know this word, auxin, which is a growth hormone that we see on this slide here. So what are some of the functions of hormones? They have different functions. They can be helped to kill weeds. So sometimes a lot of not pesticides, but fertilizers can have hormones in them that can help, kill weeds that you do not want. They can help the plant growth. So whether it's to help the plant grow more or to kind of stabilize it. Sometimes what they do is a lot of times when you have potatoes being shipped from like Idaho to New Jersey, they add plant hormones to it so that the potatoes do not sprout as they are getting transferred from one area to another. They can also help bananas that have been shipped from Mexico or Cuba or whatever. They can help them to ripen faster or slow down their ripening process. Or they can, regulate when and how fruits are made or flowers are being produced. So plant hormones, they can be made useful in a lot of different ways. So make sure you know a couple of these different ways if you are asked on a quiz or a test and be able to answer them, well. So plant hormones can be good. They can also be bad. They can be man-made or the plant itself can make it as well. So that was it for section B. Now we're going to do our section 10B quiz review. So we talked about how the anatomy and physiology of a plant are related to each other. So remember, the anatomy of the plant is when we talked about the plant's organs, like their leaves, their roots, so on and so forth. And then physiology, we're talking about the function of the plant. So some of the function is their response to the environment. Some of the function is how they grow, how they transport water, how they transport sugar. And the function of the plant really depends on how the plant is structured. How does the plant look? How does the environment affect it? Or how is the plant built? We also learned about a definition called transpiration, which is the loss of water through a plant stomata, okay? So remember, transpiration is you are moving water from the root hair, which is in the soil, through the xylem, which is specific for water, through a spongy layer, and then you are going to the stoma, or also known as stomata. So you can write stomata or stoma, they're the same thing. But that's literally how the plant is moving, water is moving through the plant. And then the root hair is helpful because they're extensions of the epidermis, and the epidermis or the root hairs are able to gather more nutrients and water from the soil in order to transport it from the root to the rest of the leaves. And then we also talked about the palisade layer. This has the most amount of chloroplasts. Remember, chloroplasts contain chlorophyll. These are made. These chloroplasts are in cells that are tightly packed together, and so photosynthesis occurs in these chloroplasts. which, take in the sunlight through the chlorophyll that's inside of the chloroplast, and they are able to go through the process of photosynthesis, which occurs in the palisade layer the most because they have most amount of chloroplast, and then they're able to make sugar through them. Remember we said that a plant can be easily influenced by its environment, which is how much sunlight it's getting, how much water, the condition of the soil, so on and so forth, the temperature that it has, and whatever the resources are. So sometimes the plant may not, you might have a seed that's planted by an area or blown by the wind and lands in an area that doesn't have good water resources, so it might not last long. We also just talked about hormones. So these are chemicals that the plant itself makes that can affect how the plant grows, but they can also have different functions, such as it can help kill weeds, it can help things to ripen. It can help things to slow down growth or stop things from sprouting, like the potatoes we talked about. And one of the main plant growth hormones is auxin, which will be in areas of the plant or the leaf that grows the most. We also talked about the stomata, which is on the underside of the leaves. Like I said, if you look at a leaf, you might notice that one side of the leaf is a lot more green than the other. And that's because the palisade layer, which faces the top of the leaf, has a lot more chloroplast than the bottom layer. And then the stomata is mainly located on the bottom of the leaf. So this is on the bottom / underside of the leaf is where the stomata is located. Remember, we said that stomata is like a tiny opening that has guard cells on either side. So the inside, which is the, let me draw an arrow here. This would be the stomata. And then both of these on the side would be the guard cells. And the guard cells are the ones that are in charge of opening and closing the stomata to regulate the loss of water. Stomata helps for this should say gas exchange, glass, in the leaves, and also allows water to leave the leaf through transpiration. And then also we talked about lenticels, which are specific for gas exchange in the stem of the plant. So stomata is in the leaves, and lenticels are in the stem of the plant. So make sure you know the difference between those. And that's it for our quiz review. Make sure you study. Make sure you copy down all of this information. If you need to stop at any point of the video to gather these notes, make sure you do that. And good luck on the quiz.